To the Point.
He is a first-term congressman, and while it's another year before Republican Allen West is up for re-election, the Democrats are already campaigning to try to defeat him. One of those Democrats is Patrick Murphy, and he's our guest today on To the Point. Good morning and welcome. I'm Michael Williams, in today for Kelly Dunn. The race for Congress in the 22nd District here in South Florida will be closely watched and will put the spotlight on, among others, political novice Patrick Murphy. And we thank you for joining us this day. And let's get right to the point. Of all the races a political novice could jump into, why this one?
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here today. Allen West and I fundamentally see things differently. He is attacking the pillars of American society, in my opinion. He's going after Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. He's going after a woman's right to choose. He's going after labor unions, collective bargaining, for example. I, for one, am going to stand up for those issues and am very passionate about that.
Well, we're going to dig a little bit more specifically into those general comments. Let's first, though, note that you were a Republican until the start of the year. Is this a matter of political opportunism? Somebody who saw Allen West as a very strong Republican and figured I'll switch parties to have a better chance to beat him? And why should people out there not say this isn't mere political calculation?
Well, it's hard to say running against a guy like Allen West is an opportunity, you know. This is certainly going to be a tough race. And although I did register as a Republican as a young man, I quickly became very discouraged with the party because of the Iraq War and began voting as a Democrat most of my life and supporting Democrats financially.
So why not the switch until 2011?
You know, it was really the extremism of the Tea Party and the Republican Party. They've gone so far right that this really pushed me over the edge, watching this Tea Party movement unfold right in front of me. I couldn't sit back, and not only did I change my party affiliation, I decided I'm going to do something about it. I'm not one to sit back and point a finger and complain. I want to get involved and do my part in public service.
In 2008, did you vote for Barack Obama or John McCain?
Obama, yes.
So at that point, you were already starting to move on to the Democratic ticket. You also, though, as late as 2007, were contributing heavily to Mitt Romney. You made a sizable contribution to him. He's been very critical of the president and his economic platform. How do you square that?
Well, Mitt Romney's a family friend, and when I supported him, let's not forget Mitt Romney used to be pro-choice, business guy, and this is a guy that came up with the universal health care system. And we've seen Mitt Romney go so far right. He's the one that's changed, not me. You know, he's really gone to the right.
But Barack Obama supports, if not purely universal health care, he certainly was the author or one of health care reform. So that doesn't square against your criticism of Mr. Romney for supporting that in Massachusetts.
What do you mean by that?
I'm not clear. You're talking about universal health care and how far right Mitt Romney's gone. But
he's changed, in my opinion. Mitt Romney has, because of the Republican Party, they've gone so far right that he's had to adapt to that. You know, Mitt Romney was a guy when he was the governor that was pro-choice, that was very pro-gay rights. He was a guy that came up with this universal health care system. So, in my mind, he has changed.
Where's your backing coming from? You've already raised, according to figures, about $321,000 and $254,000 for a far better-known Democrat, Lois Frankel, the two-term mayor of West Palm Beach. Where's your backing?
Well, I was very humbled to see our numbers. We got off to a great start, and I was shocked to see that we were the #1 fundraiser in the country. We've been able to raise support from all of South Florida, the business community, from former politicians such as former Governor Charlie Crist. Nationwide, we've been able to appeal a lot because of the guy I'm running against, Allen West. This is a very divisive figure, and we've been able to get on the radar screen on a local basis and a national basis.
We'll talk more about Ms. Frankel in just one moment. Your background, your family background is in construction. Is most of your campaign financing coming from those in development in Florida?
No, it hasn't. It's really a wide net, very diverse. Attorneys, businessmen and women, political figures, small and large dollar contributions.
Why should people say, when I have the choice in 2012, I'll go with the political novice instead of a two-term West Palm Beach mayor who makes the argument that she at least is largely responsible for helping push downtown redevelopment in West Palm Beach, that she has the ear of constituents here, that she better understands their needs, that she has a much lengthier political track record in local and state office. How do you compete against that, and why should people say, no, he's the better choice than somebody with that kind of executive experience?
Well, I offer a sharp contrast to Lois Frankel, and although I do respect her public service of 30-plus years, I bring a business background to politics. I have a background in finance and accounting, I have my CPA, and am someone that's going to bring fresh ideas to the many solutions facing our country.
Biggest problem, you talked about it earlier, and I want to delve more deeply into that. And how does somebody, 28 years old, correct?
Yes.
How does somebody deal with those? And what about those who say he's too callow, too young? He needs a lot more experience before he jumps up to a race like this with the critical issues you're talking about.
In my opinion, we need fresh ideas to these solutions. These, you know, what's the definition of insanity? You know, doing the same thing and expecting different results. We need new ideas here. We need fresh faces, and we need people that understand the intricacies of what's going on in our government. I'm not saying that CPAs are going to solve the world's problems, but we certainly need someone that will understand the financial statements, that can go through and see what's going on, to find the inefficiencies, and to comb through it and cut the fat.
Let's talk specifics. President Obama's stimulus program. Would you have voted for that?
Yes, I would have.
Why, when many argue in the Republican ranks that it has not achieved any of its goals, unemployment still over 9%, the nation's still mired in the tail end or the back end of what was the Great Recession as we've described it, why vote for that stimulus program when others argue we would have been better off with targeted tax cuts and the like?
Well, this is something that economists are going to argue for a long time to come. In my opinion, and I think a lot of well-respected economists have pointed this out, we were really on the verge of depression. I mean, we were right there. And in my opinion, the stimulus helped keep us from going into a deep recession. And we've seen the economy start to come back. It's not as quickly as I'd hoped for, but I think in part the stimulus has certainly helped put us in a position to recover.
Back to the issues you touched on the top very generally. You say Allen West, that you don't agree with him really on much of anything at all. And yet Allen West argues that this country is going broke. Many agree with him and argue that we have to have substantial changes to entitlements. And yet Democrats are assailing the Paul Ryan plan on Medicare that essentially over time would turn it to a voucher program for anybody under 55. Why don't you support that? Why have Democrats not come up with their own plan if they don't like Republicans have on the table? And what would be your solution going in?
Well, I certainly do not support the Ryan plan. And when the Tea Party came about, they said they were going to focus on jobs and the economy. Instead, you have the Tea Party worrying about social issues. They're trying to, attacking Planned Parenthood and going after gay rights.
But back to Medicare for a moment. You don't agree with the Ryan plan, but Republicans say, great, Democrats, then show us your plan. What would yours be?
We need to let the Health Care Reform Act work. I just read a report last week noting that the Health Care Reform Act has added 8 years of life already to Medicare by finding inefficiencies, waste, and fraud. And that's truly where I feel I have an advantage in this race, because I have seen that firsthand. I've done that firsthand. I have this accounting background where we can really continue to find more waste, more fraud, and strengthen this program.
Do you believe that entitlements in this country, Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, must be restructured for this nation to avoid bankruptcy and financial ruin, including means testing for Social Security? Let's start there.
You know, it's hard to say restructuring. There's probably tweaks that are going to be made to this system, these entitlement programs. To me, we need to focus on removing ourselves from Iraq, Afghanistan. There's trillions of dollars being spent there. We need to focus on Department of Defense. I read another study.
Would you cut defense spending?
I would cut defense spending,
But
no question. I think
s-
there's ways to cut defense spending that would not put our country at risk.
Would you vote for substantive changes that would include means testing for Social Security, yes or no?
You know, my job as a congressman would be to really dive into these issues and use my background to my advantage. I cannot say here whether I would means test or not. As of now, I wouldn't support it, but I would need to learn more and really dive into it.
On Medicare, would you support anything that would resemble a voucher program that begins to turn this away from a government finance program?
No. Medicare is easy. I would not support any sort of voucher program. This is a program, don't forget, that's sustainable for another 20-some years.
What do you say, sir, to those who say, but this is the same old, same old? Everybody talks about what they won't do, but won't talk about what they will do to help carve some breathing room on an unsustainable debt that threatens to ruin the country.
excuse me, I'm all about reducing the debt, creating jobs.
But you're not talking specifics, even going in as somebody says he has fresh ideas on precisely what you will do.
Well, yes, because
to cut
I think there's other ways to go about this. I think, like I said, with Iraq and Afghanistan removing ourselves, they're going after Department of Defense. I, for one, am going to stand up for Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. There will be tweaks to those systems, but I think we need to focus on getting jobs back into our economy. That is the quickest solution to the deficit. The more people have jobs, the more tax revenues there are.
Briefly, more stimulus spending, would you support it? The Democrats, including President Obama, aren't even talking about it, but do you think we need it briefly?
Right now, I don't think we need it.
August 2nd, the nation won't be able to pay its bills if the national or the nation's debt limit is not raised by about $2 trillion. Do you support raising that debt limit without substantial spending cuts to match whatever raise there is in the national debt limit, about $2 trillion?
Yes, I do think we have to raise the debt limit without question. The amount of market turmoil that will be created by not raising the debt limit is not worth it.
Do we do it without cuts that equal the increase in the hike in the national debt limit?
It can't be tit for tat at the same time frame. We need a long-term plan to get out of this deficit. It took us 10 years to get here, and it's going to take us another 5 to 10 years, if not more, to get out of it. So it's hard to say, you know, this $2 trillion and then cut immediately $2 trillion. If there's a long-term plan in place, then I support that.
Mr. Murphy, politics and morality, again, the crossroads of the national debate this week with New York Democratic Congressman Anthony Weiner in the news about the scandal online with Twitter, the sex scandal. If you were his colleague in Congress, would you tell him he needs to resign from office?
You know, I was very discouraged with the actions of Congressman Weiner, and I support Leader Pelosi's call for a full investigation. Until I see further details of that, I'll hold back my comment, but again, I'm very discouraged on his actions.
Patrick Murphy, 28 years old, from the Broward region, who will be running for the District 22 seat next year, getting an early start in that race. We thank you for taking time to join us on To The Point.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it very much. We'll be back more with our roundtable. We'll talk about strategy the Democrats are calling for, and we'll have our expert political analysis all ahead. Stay with us. Welcome to our roundtable. Joining me is George Bennett, a political reporter with the Palm Beach Post, and Brian Crowley, author of the CrowleyPoliticalReport.com. Take notes on that. Gentlemen, thank you. You just heard from Patrick Murphy, 28 years old, living in Fort Lauderdale, wants to throw, has thrown his hat in the ring against Allen West. And of course, first we'll have to see if he can take on Lois Frankel and beat back that challenge next year in the congressional race. Your take on Mr. Murphy? Brian, we'll begin with you.
You know, that was his first television appearance, and I thought he did a good job for his first television appearance. He's certainly seemed like he has a grasp of the issues, but he's got a tough road ahead of him taking on Lois Frankel. She's an extremely tough competitor, and anybody who has seen her run for public office before knows that she takes no prisoners.
But Ms. Frankel, at least early on when I talked to her about some of the same issues, hasn't carved out any specific planks on the issues that will define, I would think, the campaign next year, George, which is what do we do about this unsustainable debt? What do we really do about entitlements? You've seen the big fight in the last month or two. Talk about Mr. Murphy, as you saw him talking about those issues, really not terribly specific, but nobody has been. How does this all shake out next year?
Well, two things. Yeah, he was no more or less specific than any of the other Democrats in Florida or nationally. I think they've been content to criticize the Medicare proposal and not offer anything of their own. The other thing to remember in this race, because of redistricting, you know, there's a chance that the two of them won't end up running against each other at the end of the day, depending on where the lines are drawn.
True.
And I think at least at this early stage, you know, they're kind of avoiding engaging each other because, you know, they might not run against each other. But clearly you saw an example, though, of the national Democratic strategy so far, which has been to criticize this Ryan plan and not really offer anything as an alternative.
How sustainable is that going into 2012? We're going to have the debt limit vote that will help frame the debate on into next year, but is that sustainable for either side, really, to play rope-a-dope on issues like that?
No, I think ultimately you don't get away with playing rope-a-dope in the long term, because ultimately what voters want you to do is to make decisions and help make their lives better. So, you know, this tit-for-tat back and forth that doesn't actually accomplish anything at the end of the day is not a good thing. presumably sometime in the months ahead we'll get an answer to that question.
Go ahead, George.
The one thing, though, is, the Republican Party nationally has really not messaged this very well in terms of, the Social Security and Medicare Trustees report has said Medicare will not be able to pay full benefits in 2024. That's people that are 52 years old and younger. It's not going to be there for them unless something changes with the program. I don't think Republicans nationally have done a very good job of even setting the table in most people's minds for that kind of debate.
Has Allen West done a good job of that as we turn to the challenge that either Democrat will face against a very formidable Republican here who's made national headlines and has national celebrity? How do they carve out positions again? It's Tim that might stick, George.
He's a very conservative, outspoken figure, and he's taken a lot of votes, and so, like any incumbent, his record is going to be the issue.
And as we talk about that, we're looking at video at some of his recent town hall meetings, and George, you wrote recently about some of the protests at these being part of a strategy by some Democrats. Tell us more about that.
Sure. You've seen it at his town hall meetings and other ones around the country. Since the Medicare vote, there have been a lot of people that were genuinely upset and have come to these meetings and demanded answers, and but some of it's also orchestrated. I mean, it's not unlike what the Tea Party movement did 2 years ago in the town halls. But there's, at the last Democratic Executive Committee meeting here, there was a very specific strategy session about, go there and get loud and make your voice heard, and if they throw you out, that's fine. You'll get media attention, and there's something, it's part of it's very choreographed.
Democrats, though, have found some traction this year on the Medicare issue. They won a race in New York that they're crowing about, that they said it ended up being essentially a referendum on protecting Medicare. We'll see how it shapes up as they all develop their themes for the 2012 ahead. Gentlemen, we'll be back with both of you in a moment, looking at a budget battle right here on the streets of Palm Beach County. Stay with us.
I'm down to my functional floor. 85% of my budget's personnel. For me to cut $17 million on top of the 14, that's deputies. For every $1 million, it's 10 deputies.
A budget showdown in Palm Beach County. The issue is where to make the cuts. The county says it has to fill a $45 million budget gap. The sheriff says he can't make all of the reductions the county wants without affecting law enforcement. Let's get into the politics of this. The sparks are going to be flying. How difficult, Brian, is it going to be to match what voters want against the realities of these budget cuts? And how contentious will this debate be between the sheriff and Palm Beach County commissioners?
I think it's going to be very contentious this year. This is, over the last few years, this has been inching toward all-out warfare, and I think this year could be a very, very tough one for the sheriff on this issue. People are not very sympathetic toward the notion that you can't cut your budget. We've seen that with the school districts, when Governor Scott and the legislature wanted people to contribute 3% to their pensions, get rid of teacher tenure, get rid of some other things. Voters overwhelmingly supported the notion of doing that. When Lois Franco, when she was mayor of West Palm Beach, wanted to curb some of the things that the police department were doing, and they tried to have a picket at Sunfest, people were not supportive at all. I think the sheriff may be misreading the voters in this case, and he's up for election too, and he may be misreading the voters, and frankly, I'm not sure he'd do very well if he took this to the cabinet. Rick Scott's going to encourage him to not cut his budget? I don't think so.
As a constitutional officer, you're referring to the fact he could take this to the Florida cabinet and say, I need more money. George, let me ask you, will there be any appetite whatsoever with pressure from the sheriff saying, I can't cut any further, from people who say we want our nature centers open in Palm Beach County, we don't want pools closed? Will there be any appetite whatsoever to increase the millage rate to effectively increase property taxes?
It's hard to say whether it would be pretty tough to increase the millage rate, and several of the commissioners have said that they're against that.
Or even go to a rollback, which they can argue is not effectively an increase, but rolls back to last year's net revenue.
Right. If it comes down, I mean, I agree with Brian that the cabinet option doesn't look very good for the sheriff if it comes to that. I will say, though, I mean, the sheriff is a very popular figure in Palm Beach County, and the Palm Beach County Commission has had a lot of reputation problems, and so if it comes down to a fight between the sheriff and the county commissioners politically, he's a more popular figure, and law enforcement in general is an area where people probably would not want to cut as much as some other things.
The county administrator, very, very briefly, Brian, said, listen, people have to understand, if they don't want higher taxes, we got to cut somewhere. Have we not yet reached the point where people are willing to say, I want higher taxes if it means less pain in terms of closures or potential public safety cuts?
You know, I think if the county administrator said that he was cutting 10% of his salary and all the other top administrators, and if Rick Bradshaw said he was cutting 10% of his salary and all of his colonels and majors, they might get a little more sympathy from the public. But right now, the public does believe that there are wastes in government, period, and they don't want to pay for it anymore.
Thank you very much, and we will be back with more. The Crowley closer.
Well, you know, presidential politics are going to heat up in the weeks to come. We've got the big presidential Orlando conference coming up in September, but more importantly, in the next few weeks, we'll have Mitt Romney in Palm Beach County raising money for his campaign.
Off we go, 2011, springboard for 2012. We thank you for spending time with us on today's To The Point. George Bennett with the Palm Beach Post, political reporter Brian Crowley. As always, thank you. And if you'd like to send us a comment about today's broadcast, go to WPTV.com and click on our political link. We wish you and yours a great Sunday and a great week. Good day.